serve as President and CEO of the National U.S. Arab Chamber of Commerce, and on behalf of our chamber, I welcome you here this evening. Your Excellencies, members of the Arab Diplomatic Corps, ladies and gentlemen, you honor us with your presence here tonight. And to all the NUSACC stakeholder companies who have joined us this evening, thank you for being with us because you are the heart and the soul of our chamber. I want to give a special shout out and a special thanks to the Ritz-Carlton. George, you and your team have outdone yourselves yet again. I think that deserves a round of applause. Thank you. At NUSACC's Iftar 2 years ago, I gave an impromptu speech about some of my travels around the United States and how Arab customs had been assimilated into U.S. culture and how Arab customs have influenced American culture. After that evening, a lot of you came to me and said, "We like it when you tell stories. Would you tell us some more?" So I'm going to take that opportunity tonight to share a few more personal stories, and I hope you enjoy them. It may be hard to believe, but growing up as a boy in Iowa, I was painfully shy. I know it's hard to believe. My favorite hobby was stamp collecting, because when you're collecting stamps, you don't have to have a conversation with stamps. And while stamps do not converse, they most definitely tell a story. And when you're collecting foreign stamps from all over the world, you pick up some things about the customs and traditions of other cultures. So I remember collecting stamps from faraway places like Egypt and Iraq and Morocco, and Palestine and Transjordan and the Trucial states. And I hope that someday I might have the opportunity to visit some of those exotic and faraway places. Well, my dream has come true. Fast forward today, I've had the privilege of visiting more than 140 countries, alhamdulillah. And I've had the chance to see almost every place in the Arab world, Middle East and North Africa. For many Americans, regrettably, the image of the Arab world is not necessarily a positive one. The nightly news carries information on violence and terrorism, starvation and extremism, and so people come away with a certain image of the Arab world that I personally don't believe is true. And lost in this coverage all too often is the human face of the Arab world and the ways in which the Arab world has contributed over the years to humanity. And so by relating some of these human stories, perhaps we can change this negative image of the Arab world and give a more appropriate characterization. So in that spirit, my first story of the evening takes us to North Africa. I was a young man backpacking across the continent on my way to the American University in Cairo. When I got to Algeria, I was effectively adopted by an Algerian family in Blida. This was Dr. Longo's family. My host had worked with Frantz Fanon in Africa and helped him to create his seminal work, Damné de la Terre, or Wretched of the Earth. I had known a little bit Ambassador Majid because I grew up in Iowa, and the small town of El Kader, Iowa is named after Sheikh Abdul Qadir Jazairi, the founding father of Algeria. So I knew a little bit about Algerian culture, but I have to say I learned so much more being under the roof of the family, and I learned the customs and the traditions. But eventually it was time for me to move on to Tunis. So I caught the train, Ambassador Faisal. I caught the train. In those days, it was about a 17-hour adventure, or maybe ordeal would be probably closer to the mark. Bottled water was pretty hard to come by, and so there was a kind of a group container in one cup, and I was feeling awfully thirsty, and I couldn't help myself, and yes, I took a drink, and I got sick. And I think most of you here in this room are world travelers, so you know what I'm talking about. This was actually not a regular travel. This was a serious pull out all the stops, fever, shakes, hallucinations. But luckily for me, a family in Tunisia, Faisal, took good care of me, and Madame Ben Smida nursed me back to health. So sometimes when you ask me why I have a little bit of a soft spot for Tunisia, it's because I can never repay the kindness that Madame Ben Smida showed me during that very difficult time. So here's the moral of the first story. The compassion shown to me by these families was both remarkable and selfless. Throughout North Africa, people treated me, a stranger, as a son. This was my first experience with compassion across the Arab world, but it certainly wasn't my last. So story number 2, now we fast forward to December 2006. For years I had dreamed about crossing the Hadramaut along the southern part of the Arabian Peninsula. I had seen remarkable photos of the terrain there and the incredible architecture there, but it's not the easiest place to get to. So I was in Salalah, Oman, Ambassador Hunaini, that's one of my favorite places, and I saw my opportunity. So I hired a driver to drive me from Salalah to Aden in Yemen. We climbed in the car in Salalah at 10 o'clock p.m. We arrived at the border crossing in Yemen at about 2 in the morning. The border guard came out. The poor guy had obviously been sleeping. He walked over to the driver and he said, "Had Lamriki, is that the American?" He said, hey, Had Lamriki, that's the American. So then he walked over to my side of the car. The window was down. He stuck his hand in and said, "Welcome, Mr. David. Welcome to Yemen." And I realized later, Dr. Ahmed, that your predecessor, Abdul Wahab, Ambassador Abdul Wahab, had laid the groundwork for my trip, unbeknownst to me, because he wanted to make sure that people took good care of me in Yemen, which of course he didn't have to worry about in any case. So for the next 18 hours, we crossed across Yemen. We made a lot of friends, we exchanged a lot of greetings, we drank a lot of tea, and then we'd move on to the next community. So for me, it was really quite an extraordinary experience, and I want to say that at no time did I feel concerned about my safety, in large part because the strong code of honor that is prevalent in Yemen and throughout the Arab world. I was a guest, and people showed me the utmost respect. Political differences do exist in the Arab world, of course, but in my experience, this code of honor, this code of contact and respect is paramount. Which brings me to lesson number 2, and that is that hospitality in the Arab world is legend. And I've had the privilege of traveling all over the world, and nothing compares with the hospitality of the Middle East and North Africa. On to story number 3. So we'll fast forward again. This time I'm in the Horn of Africa. It could be Somalia, but it's not. It could be Djibouti, but it's not. It could be Sudan, but it's not. In fact, I'm in Aksum, Ethiopia. And Aksum, of course, has a very long history of dealing with the Arab world and the Islamic worlds. And in fact, in the 7th century, as some of you know, when the followers of the Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, were suffering in Mecca, they fled to Aksum, and they were respected and treated well by the people of Aksum. Christian Aksum, I should mention. So here I am in Aksum, and I want to go enjoy a walk at 6 o'clock in the morning. I see this beautiful cliff, and I decide I'm going to go walk over to that cliff. And I walk through all the villages, and I greet all the people, and it's a wonderful experience. Along the way, I run into an old man who has a walking stick, and my Tigrinian's not so good, but he basically said, at think you ought to take one of these. And I said, "No, I'm strong, I'm okay, but thank you so much for offering." And I kept on walking till finally I left all the villages behind. And the only thing between me and the cliff was a field, a pasture. And I started walking across this field. And I got about halfway across and I looked up, and what's looking at me but a hyena, right? A hyena. Now, I was raised in Iowa. We have cows, hogs, chickens, turkeys, whatever. We don't have any hyenas. So this was, I had no frame of reference. This is the first time I ever had anything like that, but probably like you, I've seen all those National Geographic movies and all those Discovery Channel movies where the hyenas are chomping on the poor animal. And I said, I think I'm going to be breakfast for somebody if I'm not careful. Actually, what I said to myself was, if it's one hyena, I have a chance. If it's a pack of hyenas, I'm a dead man. So, as I looked around for something to defend myself with, I thought back about the old man who tried to get me to take his walking stick. And I said, okay, I get it now. It wasn't that I needed it for walking, it was that I needed it for defending myself. Long story short, there was nothing on the ground, so I picked up a non-existent rock and I started waving it and I was shouting. And this hyena looked at me for about 20 seconds and he said, "Now, what is this Kalaja? What's he doing here?" And then he turned around and he walked off. And I quietly, carefully walked back to the villages, making sure not to run. But this brings me to the third attribute about the Arab world, and that is wisdom. Right? The moral of this story is I should have listened to the old man because he was trying to help me. There are times when we, as Americans, think we have all the answers. Of course, we should know better. Times like these, it behooves us to listen to the voices of the region, who have the wisdom born of long experience. America is a young country, and it's worth reminding ourselves that the Arab world is composed of ancient cultures that have developed experience and wisdom over the millennia. It is true that the Arab region is grappling with some challenging issues, and sadly, the nightly news does not capture the whole story. Rather, as my 3 vignettes this evening suggest, this is a region that is distinguished by compassion, hospitality, and wisdom. Many Americans have never been to the MENA region, and I hope that my comments this evening will help to appreciate, help to accentuate some of the positive things and the deeply rooted traditions in that part of the world. Finally, we are blessed today to have so many ambassadors and diplomats with us. Thank you all for being here. But for everybody else, don't forget that you're all unofficial, informal ambassadors too. Right? Our actions speak louder than words, and each of us leads by example. The Golden Rule suggests that we should be doing unto others that they would have them do unto us. In other words, how you treat other people reflects on our own humaneness. So in the spirit of Ramadan, whatever one's faith, whatever one's tribe, let us be remembered for our respect and tolerance and our peacefulness. So that when we say to people, Assalamu alaikum, peace be upon you, we really mean it. Ladies and gentlemen, thank you for honoring us with your presence here tonight. Iftar Kareem, wassalamu alaikum.